I want you to imagine, just for a moment, walking through a city where literally every single building is an identical, sleek glass and steel box.
Which, honestly, is quite a bleak image.
Oh, totally. You look down the avenue and there's, you know, no color, no quirky historical columns, no weird angles. I mean, not even a gargoyle hanging off a ledge.
Right, no personality whatsoever.
Exactly. Just pure, sterile, mathematical efficiency stretching out as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, which sounds incredibly oppressive if you're actually living inside it. It's essentially a dystopian film set pretending to be a utopia.
And the crazy thing is, for a long stretch of the 20th century, that was supposed to be our ideal future. Critics even called it an elegant amnesia.
That's a great phrase for it.
Right. We are digging into a thick stack of historical and architectural notes to unpack postmodernism and deconstruction.
Two incredibly radical movements.
Very radical. Spanning the 1970s to the 1990s. Basically, these architects looked at those endless glass boxes and decided buildings shouldn't just be neutral containers. They need to argue. They need to joke. I mean, they need to speak to us.
They really do. But, to truly grasp the mechanics of this mutiny, we have to examine the crisis that provoked it in the first place. We have to start with modernism.
Okay, let's set the stage.
So if you look at the early 20th century, the slogans of modernism were just incredibly crisp and confident. You had phrases like form follows function, less is more.
Oh, classic.
Right. And famously, Adolf Loos's declaration that ornament is crime, the whole goal was to find these universal, rational solutions to human living.
Which, I mean, on paper, that sounds incredibly appealing, right? Clean lines, rationality, pushing society forward without all the heavy baggage of the past.
It does sound appealing. That is, until you look at the actual human cost on the ground by the time we hit the 1960s.
Yeah, things got messy.
Really messy. The dream of universal rationality had severely fractured. You had large-scale urban renewal projects operating on those exact modernist principles, literally bulldozing established organic communities.
Just to build highways and pristine towers.
Exactly. And you had these massive social housing blocks designed with, the absolute best reformist intentions, giving everyone equal light and air.
Right.
But they often bred profound alienation because they completely ignored how human beings naturally socialize on a street level.
Wow, yeah. And in the corporate world, those glass and steel towers were multiplying across the globe, creating this crushing, oppressive sameness from New York to Tokyo.
Total homogenization. Modernism had become rigid and bureaucratic. It had completely detached itself from everyday human emotion and memory.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I think anyone listening can relate to that feeling of walking into a highly sterile, bureaucratic building, like a DMV or a massive hospital complex.
Oh, absolutely. The worst feeling.
You just feel entirely disconnected. So if modernism was a strict, highly efficient diet of plain chicken and rice.
Nutritious but joyless.
Exactly. Totally joyless. Then the late 20th century was when architects finally demanded a cheat day. They wanted to bring back flavor, spice, and honestly, maybe a little bit of junk food.
I love that. But I'd actually take that analogy even further. They didn't just want a cheat day. They wanted to fundamentally rewrite the dietary rules.
Oh, right.
And this brings us to the first major rebellion, which is postmodernism. The big question was, how do you fight back against a humorless glass box that claims to represent absolute rational truth?
How do you?
You do it by making things intentionally messy. You bring back pluralism, historical references, and importantly, you introduce irony.
Irony in architecture.
Yes. Instead of aiming for one singular truth, you force the building to speak with many voices at once.
And the architect who really kicked the door down for this movement was Robert Venturi, right?
He was. In 1966, Venturi published this massively influential book called Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. It functioned as a direct manifesto against modernist simplification.
Okay.
You brought up the famous modernist slogan, less is more. Well, Venturi delivered a highly calculated, barbed comeback. He wrote, less is a bore.
Less is a bore. I love that. But wait, so is he just saying we should clutter things up for the sake of it? Like, if less is boring, does he just want architects to slap decorations and gargoyles everywhere to avoid being dull?
Well, it might look like thoughtless clutter to a strict modernist, but Venturi's underlying philosophy was far more deliberate. He wanted architecture to reflect the actual richness and the inherent messiness of human life.
Because we aren't simple, rational machines.
Exactly. Human beings are deeply contradictory. We hold conflicting ideas all the time. I mean, we want privacy, but we want community. We want tradition, but we want progress.
Right.
Venturi believed buildings should physically embody those tensions. He championed a both-and philosophy over the modernist either-or. He wanted buildings to hold tensions together, visibly, rather than trying to hide them inside a simple, clean box.
And we can actually see that play out physically in the Vanna Venturi house, which he built for his mother in 1964.
A really iconic piece of work.
Yeah, and if you look at a picture of this house, your first impression might genuinely be that it looks like a child's drawing of a house.
It really does.
It has this big pitched roof. It looks very traditional. But then you look closer and your brain starts catching on all these weird tricks.
It actively forces you to read the facade.
Right. You have this massive centered gable on the front, which screens symmetry and order. But then the chimney is conspicuously off-center, poking out awkwardly.
Yes, breaking the symmetry completely.
And there's this giant arch applied to the front wall, but it doesn't actually frame a traditional opening or hold anything up. It's just a structural illusion. It thrives on being monumental and totally domestic at the exact same time. It almost feels like the house is winking at you.
And giving a building the capacity to wink was a truly revolutionary act at the time.
I bet.
If the Vanna Venturi house proved that a building could hold internal contradictions, well, the next leap was proving that buildings could actively communicate with the people walking or driving by. They could function as a language.
It's just fascinating. And to figure out how buildings talk on a mass scale, Venturi, along with his partner Denise Scott Brown and Stephen Eisenhower, they didn't go study the ancient ruins of Rome Or the cafes of Paris. They went to Nevada.
Yes, the Vegas epiphany. In 1972, they published a highly polarizing book called Learning from Las Vegas.
Polarizing is probably an understatement.
Oh, definitely. At that time, the architectural establishment viewed the Las Vegas Strip as the ultimate vulgarity. It was cheap, it was commercial, and it was considered entirely beneath academic study.
It's total trash to the elites.
Basically. But Venturi, Scott Brown, and Eisenhower argued that architects desperately needed to study commercial strips and massive neon signs. They saw Las Vegas as a living masterclass in symbolism, communication, and how everyday people actually interact with popular culture.
Because in Vegas, you are moving at 40 miles an hour in a car.
Mm-hmm.
The architecture isn't about perfectly proportioned space. It's about massive, immediate signage.
Exactly.
And they broke this down into a really famous distinction that, frankly, permanently changes how you look at the built environment. They divided buildings into two categories, the duck and the decorated shed.
Right. The duck is such a fascinating concept. It refers to a building whose very shape is its meaning.
Like a literal duck.
Yes. They named it after an actual building in Long Island that sold roast ducks, and the building itself was shaped like a giant literal duck. The form is the message.
Okay, that's wild.
And to them, the highly serious, abstract, modernist monuments where the complex shape of the building is supposed to express its function, those were just highly pretentious ducks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Shots fired. And then you have the decorated shed, which is just an ordinary functional box where all the meaning is literally slapped onto the front with signs and applied decoration.
Right.
I mean, think about your own hometown right now listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
Picture the local big box store or a strip mall bank that has giant, completely fake Roman columns glued to the front facade.
We all have one of those in our towns.
Right. They aren't holding up the roof. They're just communicating, hey, we are a trustworthy bank. You are looking at a decorated shed.
Exactly. Learning from Las Vegas made the incredibly provocative argument that sometimes a cheap, plain building with applied symbols communicates much more effectively to the public than a heroic, abstract sculptural form that only other architects understand.
And I have to ask, doesn't this totally validate the cheap, corporate, ordinary stuff that architects usually try to elevate us out of?
It does validate it, yeah. But it also marks a profound theoretical shift, what became known as the semiotic turn in architecture.
Semiotics, meaning signs and symbols.
Sure. Exactly. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols. Architecture was now being treated as a text that could be read. Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
Sure.
In modernism, a steel column was just a steel column. Its only job was to hold up a roof efficiently. But in postmodernism, a column, especially a historical-looking one, is a signifier. It signifies the idea of classicism or institutional authority or civic pride. The building becomes a canvas for cultural memory.
Okay, so if architecture is now officially allowed to use historical quotes, bright neon colors, and irony, what does that actually look like when you scale it up to a massive city-sized level? You get what we might call the masterpieces of irony, and they are completely wild.
They certainly abandon any pretense of subtlety, that's for sure.
Total sensory overload. I mean, take Michael Graves' Portland building from 1982. It's a massive corporate office building, but instead of being a sleek glass box, it features these bold, earthy red and blue colors and massive, oversized, almost cartoonish classical motifs painted and attached to the sides.
It's very loud. Super loud. Or look at Charles Moore's Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans from 1978. It's a public plaza that mixes glowing neon lights, shiny stainless steel, and ancient classical Roman columns. It is pure theatricality.
Though, we should probably provide some balance here, because not all postmodernism was purely a comic or whimsical exercise.
True, yeah.
An architect like Aldo Rossi represented a much quieter, melancholic strand of the movement. He used very simplified archetypes, basic cones, cubes, and stark arcades, to tap into the deep collective memory of the city.
More serious.
Very much so. He focused on the poetry and the ghosts of history rather than just delivering a visual joke.
But regardless of whether a building was a melancholic memory or a giant neon joke, this entire movement faced a massive backlash.
Oh, the critiques were intense, and they came from multiple angles. A major point of contention was the question of populism versus elitism.
Postmodernists claimed they were reconnecting with everyday popular culture by using recognizable symbols. But critics asked a very pointed question. Is a distorted, ironic classical pediment actually democratic? Or is it just an inside joke for highly educated elites who recognize the obscure historical reference while the general public just thinks it looks weird?
Which really makes me question what this all means for society at large. If you have giant corporations, global hotel chains, and casinos readily adopting this highly decorated, ironic style, didn't postmodernism just become a branding exercise for consumer capitalism?
That's a very valid point.
I mean, did it actually challenge the power structures of the city, or did it just provide better, more entertaining packaging for them?
Well, you've hit on the central tension of the era. Critics argued forcefully that postmodernism was far too dependent on surface-level imagery.
It was literally skin deep.
Exactly. It offered a fun, engaging visual facade, but completely lacked the structural or political substance to drive real social transformation. It was easily, almost instantly, absorbed into marketable spectacle.
It's just another product.
Yeah. But the irony is, even that sharp criticism validates the core postmodern premise architecture is fundamentally inseparable from media, culture, and power. Whether the architect intends it or not, the building is participating in the capitalist spectacle.
Eventually, though, the sugar rush of that spectacle wears off. By the late 70s and 80s, some architects started looking at postmodernism and felt a deep dissatisfaction. They felt it had devolved into a nostalgic, highly commercialized costume party.
They realized the critique just didn't go deep enough. If you truly want to challenge the world and how we live in it, you can't just slap a funny historical mask on a decorated shed.
You have to rip the shed apart entirely.
Exactly.
And this is where we get the rise of deconstructivism. If postmodernism is a building wearing a funny mask, deconstructivism is a building caught on camera right in the middle of exploding. It is sliced, tilted, shifting, and entirely unstable.
I would actually push back on the word exploding because that implies total destruction and chaos.
Oh, okay, fair.
Deconstructivism is more like A building that is constantly in the process of unraveling itself. It isn't destroyed. It's actively refusing to settle into a neat, understandable box.
Unraveling, I like that.
Yeah. And the public really became aware of this visual shift in 1988 through a landmark exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, curated by Philip Johnson and Mark Wigley. It catapulted architects like Peter Eisenman, Bernard Tschumi, Zaha Hadid, Daniel Lipskind, and Frank Gehry into the global spotlight.
And to understand why these architects were designing buildings that look like they are defying gravity and actively rejecting logic, we have to look at the incredibly dense philosophy driving them. Specifically, the work of a French philosopher named Jacques Derrida.
Yes. And the translation of Derrida's work into physical space is honestly one of the most fascinating leaps in architectural history.
It really is.
Derrida developed deconstruction not as an architectural style, but as a method of reading literature and philosophy. He argued that if you look closely at any text or system of thought, you will find internal contradictions. Meaning is fundamentally unstable.
Okay, so nothing is fixed.
Right. The systems of order we rely on usually depend on hidden exclusions or marginal details that, if you pull at them, unravel the entire central thesis.
Now, I can see how that works for a novel or a philosophical essay, but how on earth does an architect translate a literary theory about hidden exclusions into a physical floor plan or a load-bearing wall?
By physically attacking the traditional binaries that architecture relies on.
Binaries like what?
Well, in architecture, we unconsciously think in opposites. Structure versus ornament, form versus function, inside versus outside. We expect those boundaries to be clear. Deconstructivists wanted to expose and blur those oppositions.
Oh, I see.
Think about the mechanics of it. Instead of a wall clearly separating the indoors from the outdoors, an architect might design a massive steel beam that pierces violently through an exterior glass wall and hangs into the living room. Or they might design a massive support column that stops 6 inches short of the ceiling, completely subverting your expectation of what a column is supposed to do. They rejected the idea of compositional calm or absolute spatial certainty.
Moving from that high-level, almost dizzying philosophy to the physical spaces themselves, what does it actually feel like to stand inside a building that is actively rejecting your need for spatial certainty? Because listeners, if you ever walk into one of these spaces, you will feel the intended discomfort in your own body.
You are absolutely meant to live the fracture. It is a physiological experience.
Can you give us an example?
Let's look at Bernard Tschumy's Parc de la Villette in Paris. Usually, you design a park for peaceful, picturesque, organic harmony. You want winding paths and calm nature.
Right, a place to relax.
Well, Tschumi completely subverted that. He overlaid a rigid grid of bright red, highly fragmented, mechanical-looking structures called follies. They don't have a clear traditional purpose. They disrupt your movement. The park becomes a field of overlapping systems and deliberate disjunctions. You are walking through a landscape of conflict.
A completely different but even more powerful example is Daniel Libeskind's Jewish Museum in Berlin. Here, the architecture physically embodies historical trauma.
Yes, very heavily.
If you look at the exterior, there are these violent, jagged slashes cut into the zinc facade instead of regular windows. The geometry of the building is severely fractured. But the most intense part is inside.
It's deeply unsettling.
There are dark, empty concrete voids cutting vertically through the entire museum. You can't enter them, but you can look into them. They are unheated, acoustically echoing spaces. The architecture is heavy, and it actively forces a feeling of absence onto the visitor.
And that's why the Jewish Museum proves that deconstructivism could move far beyond just formal intellectual geometry experiments. It could become profoundly emotionally and politically charged.
Yeah, you really feel it.
By removing spatial comfort, it forces the visitor to confront memory, loss, and meaning with an intensity that a standard neutral museum box simply could never achieve.
I completely see the power in using architecture to communicate trauma or disruption, but I also have to express some empathy for the everyday listener who might be thinking, look, I understand the philosophy, but if I'm just trying to eat my lunch on a Tuesday or go to work, do I really want my office building actively challenging my fundamental assumptions of stability and order? I mean, I just want a flat floor.
That exact sentiment formed the primary critique of deconstructivism.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. Critics and the public often argued it was far too difficult, too theoretical, and incredibly hostile to everyday human experience. From a practical standpoint, making a building look like it's unraveling requires incredibly expensive, highly advanced engineering.
Right. It's not cheap to break the rules of gravity.
It uses massive amounts of resources just to look precarious. It wasn't polite architecture, it didn't want to serve you or comfort you, it wanted to provoke you.
It is the absolute opposite of the comfortable, easy-to-read, decorated shed in Las Vegas.
It really is. But if we pull back and connect all of this to the bigger picture, both of these movements, postmodernism and deconstructivism, fundamentally altered the trajectory of the built environment.
It shook things up.
Exactly. Postmodernism challenged the tyranny of modernist purity. It brought back history, symbolism, and a sense of conversational design, proving that buildings could be playful.
And then deconstructivism.
Deconstructivism took that a crucial step further, expanding architecture's philosophical reach. It shattered our assumptions about space and paved the way for the complex, fluid, digitally designed forms we see in contemporary architecture today.
They both utterly shattered the smooth, silent glass of modernism.
They proved that architecture is fundamentally about meaning, power, and interpretation. As the historical notes put it so perfectly, once architecture begins to speak, it rarely returns to silence.
So to you listening, the next time you are walking down the street and you see a bizarre, twisting building that looks like a glitch in the Matrix, or you walk past a local bank that is inexplicably pretending to be an ancient Roman temple, you now know the deep intellectual battles that put those buildings there.
They aren't just mistakes or eccentricities.
No, they are arguments frozen in steel and stone.
They are the physical evidence of a culture deciding that mere efficiency is simply not enough for the human spirit.
Beautifully put. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, building on everything we've just unpacked today. We've seen how physical steel, stone, and neon can permanently communicate irony, trauma, and power.
Right.
But as we move into a new era of augmented reality and smart cities, we are looking at a future where the entire facade of a building could just be a digital projection. A screen that changes every 5 seconds based on an algorithm.
That changes everything.
It does. If a building can constantly overwrite its own language with a simple software update, does architecture lose its permanent, monumental voice? Or does it just become the ultimate, infinitely updating decorated shed? When the city of identical glass boxes can project any illusion it wants, what will we actually choose to say?
That is the exact tension the next generation of architects will have to face.
Something to think about the next time you look up.